contemporary things. It's a bad deal. How you doing? Okay, so we've been doing John. What I want to do, we've got 3 weeks left. You know, I want to keep on going through these materials with as much perspicuity, if there is any, as possible. And I do want to skip over to be sure we get the resurrection and crucifixion resurrection materials. So I'm going to do a little bit more of John, then I'm going to try to move over to the end materials, so that gives me a chance to go back to the beginning materials that we might have skipped if we had time. It's tough to go through all the Gospels like this. So let's see. I'm just going to nip over here to John. If you can, John 10 and 11, or 11 and 12. This stuff is very revealing. And I told you if you would help me to look for all the alabaster flask episodes where women come and suddenly are walking in with alabaster flasks, and there's about 7 of them who pour ointment on them, and they're all different women. And it's really just one spin-off off the next, off the next, off the next, off the next. And you can't really judge any of those as historical. But forget that. Let's look at this. John, God, you never know where to begin with these things. Well, if you begin in chapter 7, our friend Nicodemus pops up at the end of chapter 7, 750. I mean, there's just one other, there's one thing after another that one could point to. Here's line 41. 35. Then the Jews said among themselves, like there's some foreign people here, and not one of his own people. The Americans said themselves against Kennedy. No, you don't talk like that if you're an American. It's not an American. It's not a Jewish person writing these things. He is about to go to the diaspora among the Greeks and teach the Greeks. Well, of course, that's what Paul does, and that's basically Paul Jesus. So all the Gospels have the similar approach, some more, some less. Others said, line 41 or 40, this is truly the prophet, or truly this is the prophet. That's the true prophet ideology we get in the Pseudo-Clementines, which is the Ebionite ideology. So these are the different groups. The Gospels know the different groups, what they're saying about Jesus. The Ebionites, if you recall, and I can't go into again all what the Ebionites are, but I've described it in several books. The Ebionites are the group following James. Ebion means poor. The Dead Sea Scrolls call themselves the Ebionim, the poor. And they're basically portrayed for you in documents like the Pseudo-Clementine homilies and recognitions. And there the main idea is the primal Adam for the Christ and the true prophet, which is based on a prophecy in Deuteronomy. There will come a true prophet or something like that. I think it's Deuteronomy. And you'll find that prophecy also among the Qumran Dead Sea Scrolls proof texts. I think you'll find it in the thing, in the text called the, anyway, I have a picture of it in my New Testament code book. I think you'll find it in a text either called the Florilegium or one of the other compilations of proof texts, which again consolidates further the connection of the scrolls with the Ebionite movement. And in the scrolls, of course, they call themselves the Ebionim, the poor. Others said this is the Christ. And the Christ, see how sophisticated John and all the Gospels are. This is John 7:41. Trying to pick up a convenient place to go forward. Does not Scripture say that Christ comes from the seed of David? I don't know where the Scripture says that, but in the Qumran proof text, they have a whole proof text. The Florilegium is a proof text on the promises to David and his seed. and give all of the proof text for the seed of David. David comes from Bethlehem, and that's why some people somewhere, I don't know who, thought that the Messiah, whoever he was, and I don't have all the proof text linking these things, should be from Bethlehem, but there's no text that says there is a Messiah and he should come from Bethlehem, just that that was the seed of the Davidic family, but that's 1,000 years before. And but here, John doesn't know that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, if you notice. The Gospel of John doesn't know that Jesus is born in Bethlehem, because the Gospel of John then would have said. So, the synoptics have tinkered with that to make it, and giving you several scenarios. One is the no room at the inn tax scenario, where Jesus is living in Galilee and his father has to come to Bethlehem to be taxed, supposedly, which is of course absurd, because you wouldn't have the whole Roman Empire moving to their patronymical homes because of the taxation. You wouldn't have enough subways and airplanes and transportation systems to get them all there. So I don't think that was happening. But that is the pretext to get Jesus to Bethlehem to be born. And of course Matthew doesn't need any pretext, because why? Jesus' family is always living in Bethlehem, as we discussed. And that therefore Herod wants to kill all the Jewish children. That's Matthew's scenario. One is dated 7 AD, the other is dated before 4 BC, so the two cancel each other out as far as accurate historical information goes. We basically suggested that, and I just summarized the arguments there. You may not agree. We know the traditional view, so we don't need to keep on, rereading what everybody knows. You can, we're going to pass this around again. Here. What everybody knows, we don't need to constantly harp on. But here you see, the people don't know that he comes from Bethlehem. You say, well, they don't know, but you see, he really did. Being led astray, line 47, a big usage in the Dead Sea Scrolls, used over and over again, particularly where the lying spouter is concerned. Okay, so now in chapter 8, he's on the Mount of Olives, and the Pharisees, line 13, come and harass him again, and he challenged them, you judge according to the flesh. So the flesh is usually the code name for circumcision in Paul. Paul uses that language to say, I don't need to boast in the flesh, that is to boast of my circumcision. I boast in the spirit, and so on and so forth. And let's see. I'm just trying to build up to these things with the things that we might have missed here. The Jews say to Jesus again as if they're an alien people, line 33, we are Abraham's seed, and we have not been under bondage from anyone. How can you say you shall become free? The idea of being free, of course, is again Paul's presentation in numerous places, particularly in Galatians, where the new Christians are the son of the free woman and the Jews are the son of the slave woman. So much of this is either retrospectively reflected backward, or Paul picks it up and moves it forward. You have to decide which comes first. I, of course, am on the former thing, that it's retrospectively reflected backward for people who know the letters of Paul and other materials of that kind. You'll have to decide that for yourself. So the point is that freedom in Paul is freedom from the law. Freedom from, the Jews are the children of Hagar in Galatians 4. And Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia. Paul makes the allegory perfectly clear. He says such things are allegory. You can look at Galatians 4, in talking about such things being allegory, he makes it clear that he knows or is using Philo of Alexandria's method. You say, who's Philo of Alexandria? I can't cover everything in this class. Philo of Alexandria is a famous quasi-Jewish Neoplatonic philosopher of the principal family in Alexandria. He lived from around maybe the time of the birth of Jesus, something at that time, to the maybe somewhat earlier, maybe 20 BC. Anyway, he was alive in the period of Caligula, because he wrote a book called The Mission to Gaius, among about 40 other allegorical works, taking Old Testament materials allegorically. Just the way Paul takes them allegorically here, Philo takes them allegorically. But Philo is older than Paul. So Paul, an educated person, would know Philo if he had been sophisticated and educated, because Philo was someone who was highly prized in antiquity. Now, he was the principal family of Alexandria. His brother was the Alabarch of Alexandria. In Roman texts, Latin texts, no one knows what Alabarch means, and some Latin texts outside of Josephus uses Alabarch, but call it Arabarch. That is the leader of what the Romans called Arabs. And I'm not sure that that isn't the correct original usage, Arabarch. These people all being Arabs or Easterners. So it's not, but he's a Jewish Alabarch or Arabarch, his brother. And of course the nephew who appears in Acts in about chapter 2 or 3, who is called Alexander in Acts and harasses the early Christian community. I don't have time to pick it out for you. He's Tiberius Alexander. That's the son of Philo's brother. There's a very aristocratic Alexandrian family. Why are they so important? Because they're the richest family in the Middle East. And how did they get rich? Through the India trade. The India trade dominated the Red Sea and went off to India. If you go to India today, of course everyone wants things from India then and now, spices from the Malabar coast, silks and spices, but silks more from China, spices from India. Ginger, basically. Anyone been to Cochin in India? I've been there. And there's an old synagogue there, and they have the legends of the founding around the Maccabean period. They claim that they were founded from refugees. They have a picture on the wall of refugees landing on the Malabar coast. And of course, that is the same area, right next door, where the Christian community of what is founded? Thomas. Didymus Thomas, Judas Thomas, Didymus Judas Thomas, twin Thomas, twin. Numerous references to Thomas, whose real name is Judas, and who probably was another brother, in quotes, of Jesus. I cover that in great detail in my James, the Brother of Jesus book. In the third part of that book, the latter part of that book, there are several chapters dedicated to who all the other brothers were and so on. I don't really have time to go into that with you now, but I'll just point you in that direction if you want to find out things. But the churches in India, the legends about Thomas was that not only did he evangelize the Mesopotamians, which is probably what he really did, and northern Iraq and Syria, which probably has to do with this place I'm telling you about called Adiabene, and probably has to do with the image in Acts, if you remember when Paul gets his vision in Acts. I guess it's something about why persecutest thou me on the road to Damascus. He goes to stay at the house of one, as I recall, Judas. He's called a tanner on a street called the Straight in Damascus. That probably is this Judas character that we're talking about. Forget the tanner. Here we're going to have Judas called the leper, or Simon the leper, and Simon the Canaanite and Simon the this and Simon the that, all those appositions, cognomens have to be evaluated separately, because they may contain some Greek formulation that is beyond our comprehension, that can be a play on words, like you say, Joe Schmo. So again, you really have to be an expert in the original language of the period to pull all of that sort of thing down. So in any case, the churches, probably northern Mesopotamia, but somehow the Acts of Thomas, which are preserved in Syriac and other languages of that kind further east, take him like Mani all the way to India. Mani is a teacher, a Jamesian teacher of the 2nd and 3rd century, from whom Muhammad rips off 3/4 of his material. And how did Muhammad get in touch with Mani? Because Muhammad went on the caravan trade up into southern Iraq and met all these John the Baptist and Manichaean groups up there, and pulled down a lot of material which he then regurgitated in a semi-literate form and he had a quasi-understanding of what he was saying, and of course spun it towards his own Arab mission. He was not like Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles. He was the apostle to one Gentile people, the Arabs. So he's the apostle to the Arabs. Mani also called himself an apostle and so on, and the last of the prophets and the seal of the prophets. All that went into the Quran for Muhammad. Any case, Muhammad is Mani. There are lots of books about materials about Mani, more coming to light every day. But the previous person upon whom Mani is somewhat based is this Judas Thomas material. In any case, cut it short, Judas Thomas has churches in India too. What is all this about? Philo of Alexandria's family's domination of the spice trade to India. And so the point being that all the churches in southern India that are not Jewish synagogue type places are Thomas churches. And Cochin is the center of St. Thomas Christianity in India. And I got an email recently from a person out there who said, "Oh, you don't understand, Professor Eisenman. We've got 2 groups of St. Thomas Christians out here in India. One group we call, I forget what he called them, I think he called them the Pharisees or something like that." He said, "But we're the Kunanai. We're the Kunanai Thomas Christians." Something that if I have the email from him, I will be back in touch with him at some point. But he means by that the Canaan or Zealot Thomas Christians. So they still, and it isn't a modern terminology. So these things are still, having offshoots out in these places with an imperfectly understood vocabulary. Okay, in the Galatians material, Paul says such things are allegory. So in that case, the freedom in the Galatians 4 material is freedom from the law. That's echoed again in Romans particularly. You can link these things up with Romans. So for Paul, freedom is freedom from the law. But if you take the Jewish coinage from the period, what is on all the Jewish coinage from the uprising against Rome to the Bar Kokhba uprising? Herut Zion. Herut Zion. What does Herut Zion mean? There's even a party in Israel, it was Menachem Begin's party, called Herut. Freedom. Freedom of Zion. I think I put that as the last coin in my book. Last coin that I put in my book. Anyway. Yes, so freedom in the 1st century in Palestine meant freedom from Rome, not freedom from the law. Only turncoats and traitors and people who were seeking accommodation with Rome and Roman citizens and people who wanted to save their skin were talking about freedom in terms of freedom from the law, and the law being Roman law, the new law that you were going to incorporate. Not the freedom from the law was Mosaic law, but there still had to be a law. So what was the law that you were going to incorporate in Romans 13? Roman law. So only those kind of backsliders, turncoats, and those like in Iraq today and the whole Middle East today, which has a lot, unfortunately, of overtones from the period we're talking about. Though the righteousness seems to be lacking, but a lot of the other things are floating around there. Obviously, they tried to kill such people. You know, when Acts says that the people took an oath not to eat or drink till they had killed Paul, that's a Nazarite oath. It's in when the Roman troops are escorting Paul to save him from the crowd because he's introducing non-Jews into the temple, which is, of course, like introducing non-Muslims into Mecca at that time. A totally, banned thing. I'm not saying the Jews are correct. I'm not arguing for the right or wrong of one group or another. But I'm just arguing for the perception. So, of course they would try to kill a person like Paul, but I'm sure they didn't try to kill a person like Jesus because Jesus wasn't like Paul. Paul was not executed by Roman crucifixion as far as we know about that. Maybe in Rome he was ultimately rounded up, and Christian tradition says he may have been. But in Palestine he certainly was not. And Jesus was executed by Roman crucifixion. So I don't think that the Romans made mistakes, and I have a feeling that Jesus opposed Rome apart from the material we get here, which is Paulinized. So my Jesus, your Jesus can be however you choose. My Jesus did not support Caligula, Tiberius, Nero, and all the other completely depraved individuals that represented Rome. That's just beyond the pale as far as any Jewish messianic persona, I believe, in Palestine is concerned. But Paul is not a messianic persona. Anyway, Josephus they tried to kill too. When Josephus was a turncoat, went over to the Romans and proclaimed this. He was the first to proclaim the Roman emperor the Messiah. It's in the Jewish War. It's in his Vita. When he betrays his so-called charge in Galilee, and notice his area of operations is Galilee, Josephus becomes an interrogator of prisoners, as I told you, and there's one episode that he recounts when the Romans send him out before the walls of Jerusalem to try to talk the captives in Jerusalem into surrender. And he's yelling to the resistors on the walls to be surrender and lay down their arms, and the Romans will, treat them better or whatever it is. And someone hurled a slingshot or sling rock at him, and it hit him in the head, and he fell down in a swoon. And when he's standing out there in front of the temple walls, yelling to the resistors, and he himself recounts that a huge cheer went up from the battlements of Jerusalem because the partisans thought their enemy Josephus was dead. That's real historical reporting, I think. I really think that's a great episode. How many are familiar with that episode in Josephus? Yeah, it's a great episode. A huge cheer goes up because the people thought their adversary Josephus was dead. Okay. So this is all about using Philo's allegory, which is really important. I'm more and more convinced. Now, if Paul, as I argue in my books, was an Herodian, the Herodian family married into the Philo family in Alexandria. In fact, one of the three sisters of the Agrippa I, who's one of the principal Herodian Maccabean line, it's in the back of, Ron compiled some of those genealogies for me, in the James book, and we reprinted them in the New Testament Code book. If you think that Paul has anything to do with a character called Saulus, S-A-U-L-O-S, in Herodian genealogies, and I think he does, as I've told you, he sends greetings to his kinsman, the little Herod, at the end of Romans, and no one has questioned the authenticity of that salutation, and I feel that he also mentions the household of Aristobulus in Rome, who I think is the father of that little Herod, and it was married to, of all people, Salome. It was Salome's second husband, and he sends greetings to them in Rome also at the end of Romans. So, there may be, I'm sure the coincidence of those names in the greeting section, it would be very rare if it was not Herodians, because those were Herodian names. But there's more to indicate Paul as a Herodian than that, and I go over I go into it in my latest book and other materials. There's an article online that I have, Paul as Herodian, and there's a lot of material in James, the brother of Jesus, why Paul may be an Herodian, but that's not proven. But the point is the Herodians did have intimate family connections with Philo's family. And what happened was, one of these princesses, there were three sisters, Drusilla, Mariam, and Bernice, or Bernice. Three sisters of who were the sisters of Agrippa II, the final king who they threw out of Jerusalem when the uprising occurred, who Josephus says read his antiquities and gave him 96 letters or something to help correct some of the material in that book. He says that in the Vita. So Josephus was very intimate with those people in Rome. In any event, Agrippa I, the father of Agrippa II, died under mysterious circumstances in 44. His death seems to be reflected in Acts. You can look at that. He dies mysteriously while prancing on a stage dressed as a god of some kind. And Acts has him, I think, eaten up by worms or something like that. I don't know how Acts portrays it. But in any case, Acts unfortunately calls all these people Herod and doesn't give us their actual name, so everyone would be confused by which Herod this was. In any event, his children are those three sisters. Now, Drusilla marries who? The Roman governor Felix, the most repressive and brutal of all the Roman governors, who actually talks very intimately with Paul in the latter part of Acts, where the we document intervenes, and I would say that that is probably what I and some others would consider the more reliable part of Acts. From around Acts 16 onwards, this narrative changes partially, not completely, from a third person plural, singular plural, he, they, to a first person singular plural, I, we. And notice in the Pseudo-Clementine documents, Clement was instructed by James to send 7 yearly reports to him in Jerusalem, and these reports are the pretense of the Pseudo-Clementines for how they are framed, and they are framed in a we format, I-we format. So Acts, I think, and Pseudo-Clementines are a kind of balanced presentation of a report. That is the latter part of Acts, or some people consider it a diary. In any case, in those materials, Paul speaks very intimately with Felix, and Drusilla comes in with Felix, and both of them listen to his preaching about Christianity. And Acts opines, or Paul mentions, that Felix knows a lot about the way. The way is a shorthand code for early Christianity in Palestine in Acts, and he should do, because he destroyed a lot of its leaders. And he crucified innumerable people, but we don't know their names as much as we know the Jesus event. In any event, if the Herodians, this Mariam, the second sister, was originally married to another individual who was temple treasurer, but he wasn't rich enough for her, and so against Jewish law she divorced him and married I think it was an individual called Demetrius in the family of Philo of Alexandria, because he was richer. So there's an example where the Herodian family intermixes with the family of Philo of Alexandria. So I would say that Paul had an excellent training in rhetoric and things of that kind, and therefore he probably knew his Philo, or was acquainted with Philo through personal acquaintance or people who knew Philo and were very impressed by his work. So I think we are getting that kind of thing here, and that kind of thing, to get all the way back to where we are here, bleeds into the Gospels. That is, this idea of Jesus preaching freedom where the Jews are enslaved. And the freedom implies, it doesn't say, but it implies freedom from the law. In any case, it all has, I speak the truth. Line 44, 45. When he speaks a lie, he speaks of his own, for he is a liar and the father, and because I speak the truth, you do not believe me. Galatians 4. By speaking truth to you, have I, your enemy, become By speaking truth to you, have I your enemy become? Anyway, go back to Galatians 4, you'll see that kind of language. Then the Jews said to him, 52, now we know you have a demon, etc., etc., etc. And all the issue here about being a liar and so on. Very strong in the scrolls, his criticism of the opposition as being a liar, the spouter of lying, one who pours out lying, in the Damascus document being the person who removes the boundary markers that the ancestors have set down, that is, that the first have set down. 59, I have to hurry. Jesus hid himself. The hidden ideology that seems to crop up in this period. I talk about it in my work somewhat. In any case, in 10, or look at 10:33, they want to stone Jesus. The Jews answered, we are not stoning you for good work, but for blasphemy. I don't know what Jesus has said that would be considered blasphemy in this section, but James is stoned for blasphemy. For that is always in the Talmud, pronouncing the forbidden name of God. That's all, or that you're not to pronounce the forbidden name of God. There's no other blasphemy charge that I am aware of in the Talmud, and the Talmud gives the punishments for blasphemy, and so on. So again, the Jews are after Jesus constantly here. It's kind of frightening, really. It's a little bit like listening to Borat. Chapter 11. Now there was a certain sick one, Lazarus of Bethany. Now watch Bethany and all the things, the women that come out of Bethany that anoint Jesus in the Synoptics. I don't know if I have time to pick up those parallels for you. In this case, it's Mary at a house in Bethany. Can you find the material? I think it's in Luke. There's a house in Bethany that I think Mary is there too. Can any of you find that for me? I don't know if I have I can't click around as quickly as, let's see, is it Luke 16 or something? I can't find it. It's the 16 is the one about the dogs licking his sores.
Luke 10?
Is it Luke 10? Oh, yeah, there. And they went on, 10:38, and entered a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha received him into his house. And a sister called Mary was sitting at the feet of Jesus, listening to his words. That doesn't mention Bethany as such, but that is, of course, the parallel there. But you see, Luke doesn't know that these are the sisters of Lazarus, and it doesn't even know much more about them than this, only that Martha didn't like serving. His sister gets all of the benefit. She's sitting at Jesus' feet, listening to his words. And so on and so forth. So this is a very kind of mysterious little parallel note, but it's very incomplete. There is another Bethany thing. Maybe it's Simon the leper's house at Bethany in the Synoptics. Can anyone find those scenes for me? But thanks for finding that one. That's a good parallel. You say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, the fact is that clearly John has fleshed it out further, and it is the author of Luke doesn't know the material John knows, and vice versa, and certainly doesn't know anything about Lazarus being their brother, because for Luke, Lazarus is the dogs under the table person, and that's all Luke knows about Lazarus, I think. And Luke does speak about resurrection regarding Lazarus, because he then has, after the dog under the table licking his sores, he has some people after the resurrection in a parable follow that right up in Luke 16. So there is resurrection material, but nothing like what you get fleshed out in John. What about, I don't have my, let's see. Can you find Simon the Leper material? Let's look at that one. You see any of that Simon the Leper material in Matthew and Mark? Anyway, while you're looking for it, I will continue. Anyway, there was, we did this, the sick one. What? See here, Lazarus is sick. In the Luke, he's under the table with sores. And Martha anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair. So Jesus then cures Lazarus here, I think, and stays with him. Then Thomas, 16, called Didymus, appears. And then in line 21, Martha says to Jesus, Martha here being more heroic than Mary at this point, she talks to Jesus and compliments, if you had not been here, my brother would have not been saved. And then later in 32, Mary falls down at his feet. Here's the feet material, but she's not listening to his lectures at his feet. She's falling at his feet like many of these women do with the alabaster flask and stuff. What's the...
Matthew 26:6.
Okay, Matthew 26:6. Let's just take a quick look at that. And what's it in Mark? You have 26:6. Oh, here it is. Okay. And line 5. Now, during the feast, there was an uproar. Now, Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper. There we go. So in Matthew and Mark, in Bethany, it's the house of Simon the leper, not as in Luke, the house of Mary and Martha and Lazarus. Okay? Now you say, so what? Well, because this is similar kinds of things. A woman came to him, not them, with an alabaster cask of precious ointment and poured it on his head. And the ointment, here the disciples say, should have been sold and given to the poor. Now we're going to find that in the Gospel of John, but it's not the disciples who say that. Who says it in the Gospel of John?
Judas.
Judas Iscariot, right? Judas Iscariot. So you say, what are you trying to prove? Well, I'm trying to show that these people are just playing around with this material. So it's like tossing it up in the air. Okay, we'll put it like this. We'll phrase it like this. We'll phrase it like this. We'll phrase it like this. You say, well, it must be historical. And not necessarily. I don't know what it is. I can't judge. You're the judge. All I know is that they're juggling it from one gospel to the other. So where's the eyewitness account here? I don't think it exists. I think these are some of the traditions they're playing with, and I think they are playing with them. And I'll give you one of the biggest ones. I think is it Matthew 7. Let me go back to Matthew 7. There's another woman that comes, and she does everything. She does all the things that all the ones do. It's either Luke or Matthew 7. I think it's probably Luke 7. Let's see. Let me find Luke 7. This is really tough to do on one foot. Oh yes, I think it's here. I think. Yeah, here it is. Here it is. After the tax collectors justify God in line 29 of 7, and then John the Baptist now has the demon in line 33, not Jesus. And wisdom being justified by our children in line 34. I like to see the context here. Now Jesus goes to a Pharisee's house. Not Simon the leper's house. And a woman in the city brought an alabaster bottle of ointment. So now he's at a Pharisee's house. Turns out this is Simon the Pharisee, not Simon the leper. So I told you how things switch around here. Now this woman does everything. And standing behind, weeping beside his feet. You see, it's tough to throw all this stuff up. I do it in my New Testament code book, which is what the code is all about, all these materials. And standing behind him, weeping beside his feet, she began to wash his feet with her tears, and she was wiping them with the hairs of his head, and she was lovingly kissing his feet and anointing them with oil. Well, she was really going mad. She was doing what all the other episodes do together. She was having a good time. Now the Pharisee who invited him then said, this one, if he were a prophet, would have known what kind of woman touches him. She's a sinner. That's Paul, Gentile sinner material. We are all Gentile sinners. Gentiles being considered sinners in the sense that they were not born under the law. And Paul then talks about being born in sin, which Jews, of course, don't think anyone's born in sin. It's an absurd concept having to do with a misinterpretation of the Adam and Eve story, as if anyone took the Adam and Eve story seriously. In any event, that's how Paul presents it in any case. I don't have time for that, but he's trying to explain why the people he's talking to are born in sin, and therefore Jesus takes the sin away. But the point of the matter is, if you're born under the law of Moses, you're not considered born in sin, obviously, Jews. So I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm just saying it's framing a message to a certain market. Anyway, the Pharisee, she's a great sinner, so he complains. He's complaining because Jesus is letting, dealing with sinful people and Gentiles and others and so on. And then Jesus, I think, tells a parable about a moneylender, 500 pieces of silver and another 50 and so on and so forth, and they go back and forth in this Socratic sort of dialectic. You have judged rightly. Read Plato and you'll see the basis of these sorts of exchanges back and forth. And in any case, finally turning to the woman, he said to Simon, see, so we hear his name is Simon. He said, I know that's Simon Peter he's talking to. Well, maybe it is, but I think it's Simon the Pharisee, or the person in the, very confused you. Notice it's Mark and Matthew who have the Simon the leper materials. Luke doesn't have the Simon the leper. This is the parallel to the Simon the leper materials in Mark and Matthew. Totally placed in a different place, as you see. I'm sorry to confuse you. It's that confusing. Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You gave me no water for my feet, and she washed my feet with her tears and wiped them with the hairs of my head. You gave me no kiss, but since I arrived, this woman has not ceased to lovingly kiss my feet. Well, it goes on like that. You see, and what is Jesus here? A Greco-Roman godman who deserves obeisance. He's Dionysus in the Greek tragedy. He's Asclepius, the healer in Greek mythological lore. He's Osiris in Egyptian. He's Mithra. These are god men who you should kiss their feet, crawl to, do all these sorts of things, lovingly show obeisance. This has nothing to do with Palestine. Nothing whatever to do with Palestine. It's the way the Greco-Roman world saw god men, and how God men should be presented. So obviously these men need the kind of law, but you know, the Jews are obstreperous people, as we know, stubborn, pig-headed, whatever they're called and so on, but they don't look upon things like this in the Old Testament. There are no men who deserve this kind of treatment, period. You did not appoint my head with oil, but this woman anointed him as if the Messiah would care about such things. You're a bad person, you didn't anoint my head with oil. Come on. The Messiah doesn't care about such things. He doesn't care if you kiss his feet. He does want you to wash your hands before eating. He doesn't preach, don't wash your hands before eating, because your parents didn't, as we have in the other parables, remember? So this is Greco-Roman material. Professor Hoffman, you're being very cruel. Yes, I am being very cruel, because I want to find historical Jesus. You're asking me to find historical Jesus. I'm looking for him. And I'm dismissing these materials as interesting, charming, attractive, something that will never forget, but ahistorical. Ahistorical meaning having little, not in the historical realm. You did not anoint my head with oil. Did Jesus say these things? Not my Jesus didn't say these things. Okay? Now, your Jesus? Yes. It's possible. You decide. I'm looking for historical Jesus. If you're looking for Savior Jesus, Paul Jesus, okay, that's different. But your Jesus, he may say these things, and please, don't be influenced by me. In any case. You didn't anoint my head with oil. This woman was anointed my feet with ointment. Because of this, I say to you, her many sins have been forgiven. That's the same as the woman who says, I want to eat the crumbs under the table, when Jesus says he can't preach in Canaanite lands, and she says, even the dogs eat the crumbs under the table, and then he says, your faith has saved. And then he says, I'm going to cure your little daughter who has a demon, or something like that. You remember that episode. The parallel to the Luke dogs under the table. So this stuff spins around in widening circles of materials. You say, which gospel came first? I don't know. And I don't think even my scholar friends know which of these materials came first. Because of this I say to you, her many sins have been forgiven, for she loved much, but to whom little is forgiven, he loves little. And he said to her, your sins have been forgiven. And those that they began to say with themselves, who is this that even forgives sins? But he says to the woman, your faith is saved, you go in peace. Of course we love this material. It makes life very easy for us, and nice and pleasant, and I'm not against it. But you see, we're looking for, again, by the way, right after that, Mary Magdalene is introduced. In any case, that episode, the woman from the city with the alabaster flask, she incorporates all the other ones, including some of the numbers of 500 pieces of silver and bargaining and things like that we're going to get in other places. Let me go back, it's hard, let me go back here to the Matthew episode. Where was that? 26. What number in Mark is it? Let's put our finger in Mark. Is it parallel to Mark? I think
14:1.
Is it the same exactly in Mark?
Almost.
Okay. If you see a difference, yell it out to me. Let's look at Matthew, because I can't go back and forth here. So here the disciples get very indignant. For what purpose is this waste? The ointment should have been sold and given to the poor. Knowing this, Jesus said to them, why do you cause trouble over this woman? She's done a good work towards me. The poor you have with you always, but you don't always have me. For in pouring this ointment upon my body, she did it for my burial. So this points forward to the burial ointment episodes, which will come at the end when we start dealing with the resurrection and burial ointments, particularly in the Gospel of John. It's in the Gospel of John that Nicodemus appears again among the people who prepare Jesus' body for burial and bring the ointments. I think a liter, 500 weight of ointments, precious. I forget what the name of that one kind of ointment that they always mention here is. Not frankincense, but there's another one. I can't remember what it is. And then he talks about, and he, what are you willing to give me? I will betray him to you. And they appointed to him 30 pieces of silver. So this is Judas going out at this moment in Matthew. It's kind of like right before the Last Supper material. And again, we have the monetary material things about 30 pieces of silver and Judas going out and so on and so on. But before that, line 13, truly I say to you, wherever this gospel shall be preached in the whole world, again, the worldwide Gentile mission, what this one did will be spoken of as a remembrance for her. Remembrance for her. It's in the Last Supper. Drink this in remembrance of me. And in the Damascus document, where God-fearers are concerned, as Ron and others can attest, in the last columns, 19 and 20, of the second version of the Damascus document, the material there concerns a book of remembrance, which will be written out for God-fearers who are connected to the communities. Now, God-fearers are the traditional word around the Mediterranean for people attaching themselves to the Jewish synagogues in an associated status. And now that material, I think, certainly in the Damascus document refers to Gentiles who have attached themselves to the community at Qumran, and a book of remembrance being written out for them. To me, that's the original of all these remembrance materials. That is the original of all these remembrance materials. All you have to do is pick up remembrance, look in a concordance, and you'll be able to pick out those things. Notice Matthew goes on, line 28. This is my blood of the new covenant, which is being poured out for the many to remission of sins, and so on. So he goes right on into the Last Supper material from this woman with the alabaster flask at Bethany, which John, of course, or Luke has put somewhere entirely different. Let's go back to John and pick up these materials. Now we have one episode in John in chapter 10. Okay, let's go back to John. Where are we? In chapter 11. So now it's Mary and Martha at Bethany. And let's see, how far did we get? Up to 11:32, when she came and saw Mary fell down at his feet. So we always have the falling at his feet material. And now Lazarus is in the tomb, I think, and we already did this. And he, in line 44, having dead, came out hand and foot from his grave clothes. This, of course, the superstitious world of the Greco-Hellenistic Mediterranean. And his face was tied up with grave cloth. Very, 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 very dramatic. And Jesus said to them, "Untie him, let him go." And many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw what Jesus did believed on him. So again, the Jews believe on him because of the resurrection of Lazarus. Now the others start plotting, 48. If we let him alone this way, all will believe on him, and the Romans will come and take away our place in our nation. Well, you know, that's one thing that is true. That Josephus shows that it was because the Jews were so messianic that the uprisings transpired, that the uprisings were messianic uprisings, both the first and the second. He says at the end of the Jewish war, the thing that most moved the Jews to revolt against Rome was an obscure prophecy that a world ruler would come out of Palestine. They thought this related to one of their own, but they were mistaken. They were mistaken. Actually, you see, Josephus said it referred to Vespasian, the Roman conqueror and destroyer of the temple. Well, that's about as cynical reversal as you can get. You want to save your skin? That's the way to do it. And Josephus did. He got adopted into the imperial family. He changed his name to Flavius, Flavian family. Got an estate in Rome. Got all his friends freed from the cross. Got a lot of nice women to marry and things like that. Got estates in Crete. Wrote his books and so on. Retired in pleasant retirement to Rome for a while anyway, until Domitian came along in the 90s. And there seemed to have been a falling out at that point because Domitian was mad as a hatter, and almost as bad as Nero. So Domitian was the second brother of Titus, second son of Vespasian, the brother of Titus, and he probably got rid of his other brother, Titus. Oh, by the way, as far as the three women go that I told you about before, Drusilla married Felix. Mary married into the Alabarch of Alexander's family, and the third sister I'm talking about, and the third sister, Bernicia, was originally married to, God, I can't follow all her twists and turns. You can follow them, but in any case, she was married to someone I think would specifically circumcise himself to marry her. Her father had wanted someone to circumcise himself. Josephus tells you all about her. In any case, I think she then divorced that person, married the brother of Agrippa I, who was also called, what was his name, Ron? Herod of Chalcis, yeah, Herod of Chalcis. And he reigned for a while after Agrippa I was dead. Then after he died, she was accused of taking up an incestuous manner with her brother Agrippa II, and ultimately she was Titus's mistress around the time of the fall of the temple. And she took part in the war councils about what to do with the temple. She had been barred from Jerusalem by the revolutionaries. Josephus describes this to you in vivid detail. She appears in the book of Acts on Agrippa II's arm to come and talk to Paul after Felix and Drusilla come and talk to Paul. Now Drusilla is called a Jewess in Acts. She's called a Jewess, but she's not identified as an Herodian princess. But the one thing Drusilla wasn't is a Jewess, which is so funny, because Josephus specifically tells you that she deserted the religion of her ancestors in order to marry Felix. That she deserted the religion of her ancestors. So one thing she was no longer was a, quote, Jewess. But Acts doesn't want to tell us who she really is, an Herodian princess and the sister of Bernicia. In any case, Bernicia appears with Agrippa, and Paul preaches to them. And Paul is staying in Caesarea, and this is from Acts 22 to 26 about. Paul is staying in Agrippa II's palace, it says, under a kind of protective custody, and they all say to him, Paul, a little more and you would make us Christians. And they also said that this man does nothing deserving of death, and he should go to Caesar. And Paul then, as you know, appeals to Caesar and is sent to Rome. And he's in good shape in Rome. No one knows him, no one's heard about him. He has his own house, he's paying his own rent, and he's preaching and talking, and that's where Acts ends. It doesn't tell us what happens to Paul or any of his fate or anything like that. I think Paul went free again after that, and he survived for another 4 years or so until the general roundup at the time of the uprising against Rome, when early Christian texts say he was executed at some point. That would be 4 years after that, but the point that is lost in Acts is that this is 62 AD, and the very thing that we know happened in 62 AD, for getting Paul under loose house custody, living in his own house, paying his own rent in Rome, not being hindered by the Romans in any way, shape, or form. The thing that happened in 62 AD is the stoning of James in Jerusalem, and Acts doesn't bother telling us about that. How come Acts ends with Paul under loose house arrest, if it's arrest at all, in Rome, and neglects to tell us about the death of James? Do you mean to say that Acts' authors didn't know about the death of James in 62 AD? We're not interested in the death of the leader of the church, the worldwide leader of the church in Jerusalem? You'll have to answer that question. So Acts is not an Acts of the Apostles. It's basically a promotion of Paul. It's a history written to promote Paul's role in the early church. In any case, I can't go into that particular issue any more than that, but let's look here again. If we let him go, all will believe on him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. That is true. The Romans came away and took away our temple and our nation because we were so messianic. That is absolutely true. So it wasn't because the Jews were not messianic, as the Gospels portray them, but it was because they were so messianic that they lost everything. Look, Caiaphas, now the priest, says, you do not know anything, or consider what's good. It's better one man die for the people than the whole nation be lost. He might gather together into one the children of God who have been scattered, and so on and so on. So they decide, obviously, there that it's better to get rid of him than the whole nation perish, which is how they did treat messianic leaders. That is certainly true. Whether that was the decision taken about Jesus or not, at this point you'll have to decide. But that is quite a different presentation. In other words, they were worried about the Romans destroying the country and the temple. I think that's retrospective too. I don't think that's really historical. But at least the writer understands that issue at least. Okay, 6 days later, chapter 12. Jesus comes to Bethany, where Lazarus lived. What? We already were there. Now we're back again. I think this is the two episodes now conflated. The alabaster women sort of episodes that we had earlier. Now another Lazarus episode. Lazarus, I guess, had already been resurrected, and the text says, he who had died but had been raised from the dead. I have that in a kind of parentheses. My translator puts it in a parentheses. It's like the author of the gospel is trying to explain why he's suddenly there again, so he explains. And they made a sufferer, and Martha served. Oh, this is the material from Luke about Martha serving and complaining because she has to do all the serving. And Mary getting all of the benefit. And Lazarus was one of those at the table. Now it's Mary who takes the ointment of spikenard. That's what it is. The ointment of, look up spikenard too if you want to get all the spikenard episodes. Takes a pound of ointment of pure spikenard of great value and anoints the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. Oh, we know what that episode is. The wiping his feet of the hair was his hair was in Luke, the woman of the city, in chapter 7 of Luke, who did all kinds of things, bathed them with her tears, wiped them with her hair, anointed him, and so on. Now it's Mary, the sister of Lazarus, doing this. You say, well, they're all the same. Well, maybe or maybe not. Now, instead of Simon the leper's house, then one of his disciples, Judas of Simon Iscariot. So Simon Iscariot, Simon the leper, Simon the Pharisee all have to be grouped together, I submit to you. So they all occur in common context. And who is Simon Iscariot? Well, if you look at the Gospel Apostle list, Simon the Canaanian comes in a cluster of 3 apostles. This is in the synoptic list. James the son of Alphaeus, Simon the Canaanian. Luke will decipher that for us. He will be called what in Luke? Simon Zelotes, Simon the Zealot, which is the same as Simon Iscariot, because Iscariot probably is Simon the Sicarii, the extreme form of the Zealot movement. In any event, these are the arguments that I pursue in both of those 2 books. But those are how to bring the 3 together. Now, Judas Iscariot, Judas is called of Simon Iscariot. If you look at the apostle list, the 3rd person is Judas of James. That's in the Gospel of Luke. I don't have time to run over there and get it for you, but look at the apostle list in Luke and Acts, and then look at the apostle list in Mark and Matthew. It's in, I think, Matthew 10. And the fact of the matter is that, well, John doesn't have an apostle list, so you don't have to look in John. There's no apostle list given you in John. But the 3 cluster of 3 that have the names of Jesus' brothers, James, son of Alphaeus, read Cleophas. Who's Cleophas? I've told you about the difference between Alphaeus and Cleophas. It's just the difference between an alpha and a kappa, which are very similar letters in Greek. Who is Cleophas? He's called the he's called the uncle of Jesus in the church texts. He's called the brother of Joseph. I don't have time to write this all on the board. And he's supposed to be the father of the other brothers. James, Simon, Jude, and Joses are supposed to be the sons of Mary and Cleophas. Well, that makes Simeon bar Cleophas, who is supposed to be the 2nd successor to Jesus in the Jerusalem leadership of the church after James, not the cousin of Jesus, but actually the 2nd brother, Simon the Canaanian, Simon the Zealot, Simon Iscariot, and then this Judas here is really the Judas of James, the Judas of Simon Iscariot, one of the 3 brothers. Now, look, I know that that's very difficult to comprehend. I'm not saying it's proved. All I'm saying is this: how these circle of names twirl about. So, you know, I'm not even sure who Judas is. I don't know who he's supposed to be. I don't know what Iscariot is supposed to be. But all these names are names in the family of Jesus itself. And I'll just leave it to you at that. In any case, let's look at how he develops this. So now, the wiping the feet is at the house here, and one of the characters is called Judas, and that's why you should look at the Greek. He's not called Judas Iscariot, Simon's son. He's called Judas of Simon Iscariot. Now, of Simon Iscariot can mean brother of, son of, or something like that. It doesn't necessarily mean Simon's son. And I think in this context, we probably would be better to read. Well, let's look at quickly Luke's apostle list. Have you got it? Where is that? Where Luke gives you all the apostles. 6:12, thanks. Okay, Luke 6:12, you think? No. Yeah, there it is. Luke 6, yeah. 6:13, the 12 arrived. Simon, Peter, Andrew, James and John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, Cleophas, Simon called Zelotes, Simon Zelotes, and Judas of James, Judas the brother of James. So those 3 I submit to you, and then added on to those, Judas Iscariot, who delivered him up. So several Judases right in a row there, and you'll have to work on that, but I think that those 3 are certainly supposed to be the family of Jesus. That is James Alphaeus, Simon the Zealot, Judas of James. The letter of Jude, how is Jude referred to? It's actually referred to as Judas Jude and Judas are all the same word in Greek. There's no Jude, there's only Judas. Jude is not Jude and Jude is Judas. It's all Judas. He's called Judas, the brother of James. So let's go back to John 12 here to finish these episodes here. So I guess we'll have to do the resurrection material next time. Any case, now it's Judas Iscariot, as we already saw last time, who says, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 pieces of silver and given to the poor?" 300 pieces of silver. The very next line in the synoptics from that episode, we say, what's going to happen to Judas? He's going to betray Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. Now it says sold for 300 pieces of silver. What did the parallel material in the, oh, I'm getting confused here. Did it say 300 pieces of silver in the other ones? I can't remember.
Mark says 300.
Yeah, 300. Well, so these numbers float about, up and down with extra or less zeros. And we'll see that the material applied to Judas selling Jesus for 30 pieces of silver is given as a reference to the prophet Jeremiah, I think, when in fact it's supposed to be Zechariah. What it means, well, in the scripture it's called Jeremiah, but in fact it is Zechariah, and we'll look at that next time. Anyway, Jesus does pick up the theme of his coming burial, like he did in the previous episodes. Now, he did not say this because he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief and he had the purse. Okay, Judas didn't care about the poor. He was a thief, the narrator wants us to know. So this Judas is just demonized, pejoraticized, and to add insult to injury, now he's a thief and has control of the purse. And he's just a horrid person from beginning to end. Well, the new gospel of Judas Iscariot that has recently been found in the Nag Hammadi materials puts that one right and shows that people were just writing these materials in the way they wanted to spin them. Another now gospel of Judas has appeared, and now Judas is doing exactly what Jesus wants him to do, and Judas and Jesus have very friendly, philosophical, Neoplatonic chats, and Judas is the most perfect of all the apostles, and he's done nothing wrong at all, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, I say, well, that's just apocryphal material. No, this is all in the process of formation at that time. What makes one apocryphal and John not apocryphal? These things are all being thrown in the air and competing with each other according to who's writing them. So, I mean, where's the history is what we're looking for. Well, I'm not sure. You can find it if you want, but I'm not sure I found it yet. In any case, Judas is a thief, and now he's the one saying this, not the apostles or the other disciples as in Mark and Matthew's. Which episode was that in Mark and Matthew? I can't remember. Was it the episode at Simon the leper's house? Was that where it was? Or was it the episode, yeah, the episode at Simon the leper's house, I think, where the, totally confused. And that was the house in Bethany. All this is in Bethany notes. So these are not separate episodes. The Simon the leper house is in Bethany. This is in Bethany. The statement, it should have been given to the poor, is in Bethany. So these are not separate episodes. So where's the history? You decide. Any case, line 10. But the chief, now, then a great crowd of Jews learned that he was there, and they came, not only because of Jesus, but that they may also see Lazarus, whom he raised from the dead. But the chief priests plotted together so they might also put, now the chief priests want to put Lazarus to death. Because many of the Jews were leaving and unbelieving on Jesus because of him. I can't go further with that particular passage. You may not find that odd. But, you know, now, before we heard the priests want to put Jesus to death or do something to Jesus so that the people might live because the Romans might come away and take their country. And in chapter 11, we heard that the people believed on Jesus because they saw what Jesus did with Lazarus. Now in chapter 12, at the end, the chief priests now want to put Lazarus to death because they might, because many of the Jews were believing on Jesus because of him. I leave that to you to work out for yourself. In any case, we then get the material of Jesus going up to Jerusalem in John. So we do come into the final section of the denouement of John at this point, and all of them more or less agree with each other. Okay, so next time we will work on the materials in all the Gospels, particularly the post-resurrection sightings. Now the point again of what I'm doing here is to see where can we find the historicity here. And if you can find the historical Jesus here out of these contradictory and odd materials, all floating around different similar themes, then that would be a good thing. I'm not yet, for me, again, if you want to know who the historical Jesus was, somebody was crucified. That's what Paul knows, and came to a bad end. Somebody was crucified who was very popular among the people, who the people were very concerned about, and members of his family succeeded him in the leadership of the movement he was involved in. That is the historical kernel that I can pull out of materials in Paul and elsewhere. Now, do these materials in the Gospels add to this? So far I haven't seen that they do add to it. If there is something here that does add to it, please tell me when you find it. Anyway, question? Okay, I've counted you all. I didn't mean to make you angry before Christmas. See you next time. Just take this as the counter position. Don't enjoy doing this. It's quite painful. Yeah.
Can he actually disagree the story for that? At one point, Jesus went to somebody's house.
I don't know. No, I can't even see that you can agree on that. What? That someone poured ointment on his head and kissed his feet and wiped it with his hair? You can take that as historical, should you wish. I find that the floating of these episodes around just tells me that someone threw this one out into circulation and others played off it. But I don't know if we can take it as
It's just an idea that I